So I was going to go for some news items, just because they could be clipped out and put into the stream, but there's not enough people here to really warrant it. I'll go over them briefly. There was just some announcements from AWS regarding some small things. So if we, I won't switch to the browser actually to copy paste the things in. Oh, Julio, hey Julio. Let's have a look. So yeah, there was a large DDoS attack on a Belgian ISP, which I thought was very interesting. It reached about close to 300 gigabits per second, pretty much constantly. I thought that was pretty interesting. It's possibly like an DNS amplification attack or something. AWS announced basically startups. It's called Build for Startups, and it allows them to spin infrastructure up really, really quickly. I thought that was really interesting. They've increasing EC2 instance size network bandwidth. So if, for example, you ramp right up to a really high-end instance between your instance and a direct connect or an internet gateway, you can get upwards of 25 gigabits per second. It's previously capped at about 25, but they've now sort of uncapped that for really large instances. So that was some of the featured. I only look at the sort of the featured stuff that AWS and Google and stuff like that push out. I don't go through the entire stack of news because there's just so much, because those platforms are just massive. New storage features help ensure data is never lost. So Google Cloud is expanding their storage portfolio and adding in more storage capabilities with better redundancy. And they've opened up a Google Cloud region in Toronto, which is very, very cool. From an Azure perspective, let me load this up here. So Azure Stream Analytics 3 new regions are now generally available. I'll just click there, get that open. So Switzerland North, South Africa North, and West US 3. Well, that was pretty cool. Again, just a high-level overviews from these people. Azure Virtual Desktop is now available in Azure China. And I saw that GitLab has IPO'd. They've gone to the SEC and they filed for IPO, which is very, very interesting times indeed. All right, cool. Julio, doing fun Linux compilation since working and getting a particular distro to run natively on Mac, meaning M1 bare metal. Oh, okay. Very interesting. Wow. My days of doing that are well over. All right. So I did find this question. Let me load it up. Unfortunately, the question I think was deleted. Let me just double check here. I think for some reason the person. Oh no, hang on. No, they didn't. Okay, let's pop on over to the browser then. So, what are your hours 9 to 5? I like that the sort of top comments is just like, oh, whenever. That's kind of true. That's pretty much true if you're a permie. But I'm looking at this from a sort of contractor perspective. So the question is, what are your working hours? So as a contractor, my working hours are very, very much quite strictly 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I have in the past been asked to work on a weekend once. The client wasn't very happy when I charged them double, but I do that on purpose because then it really puts them off wanting me to work on the weekend. And guess what? They never then ask me to work on the weekend. So it works. So as a contractor, you're pretty much tightly bound into your hours. They understand they're getting you for 40 hours or 30 hours or 10 hours or whatever it is on a weekly basis. They're paying you a fixed rate and pretty much they're getting labor within office hours for that amount of time per week. That's pretty powerful for a contractor and for me because it allows me to focus on my work-life balance. And it's something that I find really, really important is the ability to disconnect and go home and just focus on home things rather than be worrying about Teams messages or Slack messages coming through at 11 p.m. asking me to do something, which does happen. So from my perspective as a contractor, 9 to 5, and it's pretty tight. That's pretty locked in. For permanent staff, as this top comment sort of alludes, it's pretty much just sort of like whenever. It is just all over the place. There's no real sort of... You'll find that your contract will say Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but that won't really reflect reality. You'll be expected to be on call. You usually have an on-call rota. It's something that will be out there. You'll be expected to be a team player, and you'll be expected to possibly come in on weekends when things hit the fan. So for permanent, it's very difficult to sort of just say, to answer the question, what are your working hours? Oh, it's just Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. from a contractual perspective, it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But contracts always have additional clauses in there that say things like, we can sort of get you to do whatever we want, whenever we want, within reason, on a sort of non-regular basis. So my advice would be to make sure that your contract is pretty tight. Make sure you're reviewing the contract in detail. And if you don't understand that, just get a lawyer. I know it sounds really expensive, but really, if you think about it, if a lawyer costs a couple of $100s to check over a contract with you and explain what's legal and what isn't legal, what they can and can't enforce within that contract and what your rights are, and that costs $500, but then you go on to work at that company earning $80, $90, $100, $110, $200,000 a year for the next 5 years. It's an extremely small investment to ensure that you're getting a good deal with regards to that contract. So for me, healthy hours look like not working beyond your 8 hours. So I recommend that you consider never working beyond your 8 hours. That does mean getting to the sort of 5 to 5, maybe even a 10 to 5 mark in the afternoon and going, okay, I'm not going to finish this task. I'm banging my head against the wall. So I'm going to document what I've done. I'm going to push any code I need to push, hand over any items that I need to hand over. And then 5 past 5, maybe even 10 past 5, I'm pretty much going to I'm going to be out the office. I'm going to be heading home. The way I look at it is you sleep for 8 hours, you work for 8 hours, and then you play for 8 hours. That's sort of what happened here in Australia, especially in Queensland. From a union perspective, there was a lot of push for that sort of 8-8-8 solid sort of well-rounded day, and that seems to be a lot of people who I spoke to before I came to Australia said that it's very laid back. I think that's what they meant. It's very much you work your 8 hours and then you sort of move on. In IT, it's a little different. So my advice is don't go beyond your 8 hours, regardless of essentially within reason what your contract says. Don't let management bully you into working longer hours because we're a team. It doesn't work that way. You have a contract that says you work a particular amount of hours for a particular, to do a particular skill, particular job, in return for a particular amount of remuneration, a particular amount of money. So that's pretty much where the line is sort of drawn and ends, is you don't go beyond that. There is no going beyond that on a consistent basis, at least. If you're asked to work an hour here and there or cover for someone here and there, or maybe there's like a big release cycle that you do once every 2, 3 or 4 weeks or something, definitely not weekly, and it requires maybe an hour, 2 hours worth of extra time, then you've got to be making sure that you're either getting paid for that or you're getting the time back. If you're getting the time back, that somewhat balances it out, in my opinion. But ultimately, the whole we're a team is it's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. Look after yourself first. You have a contract between you and another company, which means that you are essentially almost like another company, a company of one. And it's up to you to ensure that it's equitable on both sides of that contract and that agreement. Don't let contracts bully you into thinking an employer can make you do anything they want, as a note that I've taken down here. Again, contracts can have clauses in them that say things like, within reason, we may ask you to perform duties outside of your existing set of duties from time to time. Again, this is where you get someone like a lawyer to sit down and go over the contract with you, to tell you what local labor laws say, and so on and so forth, so you can determine whether what they're asking is enforceable, even legal, and what your expectations of that going forward can be. And even when you're interviewing as well, ask them, what does this mean? Can you give me an example whenever this has been enforced? What does it look like? And when interviewing for a permanent role, try and find other people that work for the company on LinkedIn and reach out to them directly. Ask them questions. In this context, say to them, does this get applied a lot? Are you asked to work weekends a lot? Are you asked to do things outside of what you normally do? If I went in as a JavaScript programmer and then all of a sudden someone said, you now need to maintain this Perl, this really old Perl microservice or monolith that we've had since the 90s, then it doesn't really work that way. You can't really be expected to do that. So in that case, they need to either pay you more, give you time back, or find someone else and hire someone to do it. And then, of course, the other side of the coin is they can hire someone, or you can say to them, well, how about we actually flip that from Perl and we port it over. we actually port it over into another language, Go or something, and then we then can then maintain it, and then it just becomes part of my normal duties. Most companies would probably be up for that. Don't work weekends. I would avoid weekends at all costs. Again, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. What I essentially mean with don't work weekends is don't get to the end of the week, get to Saturday and think, I'm bored, I don't have anything to do. I don't really want to play games, I don't really want to go out and socialize. So you crack open your work laptop and you just carry on doing some work. Don't do that. It sets an expectation and a precedent going forward when management see you committing code on the weekend. A good leader should tell you that you're not to do that. A good leader will say to you, please don't work on a weekend, don't work outside of your normal hours, and it will be an official warning to not do that. Most companies won't do that. They'll just let you do it, and they'll think that you're being a great team player. So don't work weekends, because then in most cases, it will just be expected going forward. Don't work nights. So what I mean by this is, don't look for jobs where you work nights as your permanent thing, unless you have personal circumstances that force you to work nights for whatever reason. In general, don't work nights. It's incredibly unhealthy. Really, really, really unhealthy. And I'm talking more contractually. Don't take a contract where you're on 4 on 4 off nights or anything like that. I'm not talking about on call. There are times when you work for an organization and you'll be woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you'll be expected to fix a priority 1 problem. I'm not talking about that. That is obviously a little bit of a micro night shift right there when you're woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning to do some work. But that's on call. That's just the nature of our industry. We work in an industry where we're producing products and services that are expected to run 24/7. So on call is to be expected. But on call should also mean you either receive money for that on call and or time in lieu. I would try and negotiate both. I want money for doing that, and I want time in lieu, because ultimately it's very, very unhealthy for your circadian rhythm to be waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Even getting out of bed at 11:30 when you may have only been in bed for an hour. If you've gone into any form of sleep cycle and you're broken out of it, and then you're expected to sit in front of a screen emitting blue light into your retinas, into your brain, it's going to start triggering your brain. It's very unhealthy. It's really, really bad. So you should be compensated duly for that. And just one final note on this whole point of what are your working hours is life is generally for living. So you should attempt to negotiate a contract that is aimed at allowing you to live your life, as well as solving problems for that business. The business has identified a problem. They've identified that they can build a product at a good price that enough people will buy in order for the business to be worthwhile. And now they need you to help them solve that problem. So go out and solve that problem. But that doesn't mean that you become a drone or a robot or a part of a machine. It simply means that you help them build their problem for 40 hours a week, 35 hours, 45, whatever you want to agree to, whatever you feel is healthy for you and works for you. And then outside of that, that's it. Disconnect completely. So I hope that helps. I hope that that's a good little bit of advice there on sort of working culture and hours. I'm going to look at some of these comments. I really love this one. Whenever. That's actually really funny. It's pretty much true. There's always too much work to be done. You can work as much as you want. Our management understands this and is sensitive to people burning out. I encourage this is an example of a good leader here. This gentleman here, that super upvote is from me, because I didn't actually upvote him. I gave him the super upvote, but I didn't actually upvote the post. I encourage my staff to stick to a solid 40-hour work week and notify me of business justification if they go over. Life is meant for living. We work to live our best lives, and the best work we can do is when we have a well-balanced life and work schedule. So true. This is a really good point right here. So I'm going to pop this in here. Let's see what you chaps in here are saying. The question I have is how do people consider learning hours in? Do they learn only during work hours or after hours for personal development as well? On the other hand, having on call, yeah. So how do you learn new things whilst also working and also having a life outside of work? So this question is I'm going to answer it, but I'm also going to take a note of it, because what I like about that question, Julio, is that it comes up often. And where's my list here? Let's go back. It's a really, really good question that comes up often that I find very interesting, because there's a couple of ways I look at it. How do you learn? I'm going to call it, when do you learn new technologies? Sort of like, how do you find the time, right? How do you find the time and balance work and life? All right, that's in there. Thanks very much. It's a good question. Let me answer it. There's my two opinions on this. If you work in IT, you either work in IT because you really, really love computers, they interest you, it was once a hobby for you, and you simply enjoy tinkering, as you're doing right now you're doing for fun, you're compiling a Linux distribution for fun. Obviously, this is something that you find interesting, or you have a requirement, or you like solving problems. And so when you leave work at the end of the day, you generally find that you crack open a laptop and you just start tinkering anyway. You start writing an app, you start writing some code, etc. And you find that is something that you enjoy doing. Those kind of people will just naturally, organically learn new technologies because they'll just want to play with them when they go outside of work. If you went into IT for some other reason, or you do enjoy it, but you then get home and you don't really want to touch technologies, you are going to find it harder. And the only thing I can recommend you do there is you move organizations a lot. So you either contract, like I do, and that means that you move around every 6 to 12 months. And that means that you're being exposed to different environments and cultures all the time. And then you try and stick to smaller startups as opposed to large enterprises. Or you try and go into large enterprises where they're actually looking to transition to a new cool technology, and which means that you can then, of course, you can help them implement that technology. So therefore you learn that technology, and then you get to move on to another contract and take that knowledge with you and grow and evolve it. So moving around a lot is the only real choice, unless, of course, you don't move a lot, but you work for an organization who is very happy to let you explore new technologies in time. Like Google, for example, they do that 20% per week thing where you get to work on anything you want. That's incredibly powerful. That probably works really well for them. However, they are worth a couple of $100 billion, and so they can kind of afford to do that. Most organizations pretty much can't, and also they're a bit archaic in their culture, and therefore find it difficult to permit that, or even reason about why that's beneficial long term. But ultimately, I think you've got to have a strong interest in wanting to pick up these technologies outside of work. It could also be that you have a problem. I find this works well, as you have a problem in a workplace. Your workplace have rejected your idea to solve it. So you go outside of work and you sort of solve it privately. So you sort of think about the problem, you replicate the problem in a private setting. Obviously, you don't use data from work or anything like that, or any work resources. You just do it privately, and then you solve it, and then you learn it, and you go, yeah, I am correct in this regard, or actually I am wrong. This would actually be more difficult, and you learn from that. And unfortunately, you then pretty much just move on. If you use work stuff, then yeah, you might get sued if you try and use their data. So don't do that. Go outside of work. Don't take any data with you. Don't use a work laptop. Just use personal AWS accounts, personal resources, personal internet, electricity, everything. Don't use any data. Just make it all up and off you go, and you'll be fine. So that's a good video. A good idea, Julia. I'm gonna look into that. Cranky Doggy. Do people find Glassdoor of value in getting a valid perspective on an organization? I have heard of Glassdoor. I haven't used it in quite a while. I don't think I've ever really. I don't think I've ever actively gone, let's look for a company on here. Let's have a look. Let's see if we can find someone. I don't want to do any of that. I'm a director. There we go. I'm in Brisbane, Australia. Brisbane, yeah. Send me updates, new jobs. Wait, no. Most recent employer, me. I employ myself. Are you currently a former employee? Tell us more. They want to know a lot just to sign up, right? How about, yeah, oh my God, that's so frustrating. Let's put a company in here. Subway. Love it. The top one there was Subway. Discover companies, popular companies in Brisbane. Let's see if I come up. Nah, probably not. Let's have a look. I guess it depends, but it's a good thing. Quite jarring when fake reviews show up, so you will know what is real versus fake reviews. Deloitte, McDonald's 3.5, PwC, EY, KPM, IBM, Apple. Not surprised Apple has over 4%. I've heard they're quite good to work for. Boeing, let's have a look. Companies, compare companies. Your company preferences. Popular companies in Brisbane. That doesn't seem to be doing very well, does it? Let's reload it. More recommended. Let's have a look. Oh, I see. It's duplication of what was down below. Amazon. They don't have too bad of a rating, actually, Amazon here in Brisbane. Probably works better for US. Yeah. I think in the US, I'd probably be, let's see if we can find Jumbo Interactive. I used to work for Jumbo. Just a random company. Let's see if we can find them. Just came to mind. No, thank you. I don't want to. Why? Just because I've searched for a company. Why have I now got to... Okay, it's anonymous. I won't take it. Add your review or salary to continue using Glassdoor. Oh my god, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely awful. Yeah, I don't want to have to do that though. Why should I have to block this element? God. But now it's now I'm gonna have to think of it, and I can't scroll. I've lost scroll as well. Ridiculous. 4.6. I'd agree with that. 4.6 for Jumbo. They were a pretty good place to work. Yeah, they want a vial of your blood to look at companies. Yeah, okay. Guess won't be using that service then. Oh well. This one ended up actually getting deleted. So I don't have a link to the post. So we'll just pop over to green screen here. So the role or the company culture was the question that came up on Reddit, and I thought that this was a really, really interesting question. So the original poster, who, as I said, has deleted the post, so I can't show you it, essentially said, do I go for the role and just focus on the role and ignore the culture and the company? Or do I go for the company's culture? So when I'm looking for roles, when I'm looking for jobs, do I go purely for culture and ignore the role and just accept any role at a good culture? Or do I go for a good role and ignore the culture? And I think that it's a good question, because can you really have 100% of both? So can you find a really good role and a really good culture? I think that you can. I think that is possible, but I would say that it's much more difficult to find, because you're looking for an organization. I mean, first of all, I guess you've got to define what a good role is to you, and you've got to define what a good culture is to you. If a good culture is, lots of time off, very flexible, good leadership, very healthy work-life balance, good benefits, nice office in a good location with good work from home, remote possibilities, a company car, a company private jet that you get to use free willy-nilly, then of course the culture is going to be great, right? But then if the role is, I don't know, going around washing everyone's feet underneath their desk, then it may not be the right for you. But it's up to you to define what a good role is to you and what a good culture is to you. So for me personally, I'll look at it from my perspective. A good role should have interesting technologies and interesting problems. And a good culture should be one that's willing to push boundaries, willing to accept when things that have been done in the past are now starting to show their age, and they need to be sort of reworked and refined to take on a more modern approach. Good management, good leadership, and a sort of healthy work-life balance with no expectations of working ridiculous hours, doing on-call and stuff like that. Now, as a contractor, I sort of generally get a lot more of what I want, because I go in there with a very clear expectation that this is what I do for this amount of time, for this amount of money on a daily basis. And so the company doesn't really dare go outside of those hours. So the work-life balance for me is always there. Finding companies that are willing to be flexible and look at new technologies and so on and so forth isn't actually that difficult, I find, in Brisbane, and maybe in Australia, generally speaking, simply because as a culture here, Australia, especially maybe Queensland and Brisbane, I think Australia, maybe generally speaking, has a very highly educated population. And so most of these people that I work with have been to university, or they're very generally naturally quite smart people. And so they understand that times change, technologies move on, things get deprecated. And so I find that most companies here are willing to accept that Terraform is sort of how you do infrastructure now. Infrastructure as code is correct way of doing it. And so we want to look at doing it. However, we've got this big pile of old stuff here that we've got to very carefully move over. But they're at least, as a culture, accepting that they do need to go from this big pile of poop that they have over here, and they need to produce something far, far nicer. Otherwise, they're going to find it very difficult to not only hire people in the future, but also manage that technology going forward. As for the role itself, do I find it hard to find roles that explore new technologies? Not really. I do tend to take roles that usually have a lot of legacy stuff involved in them, so they're not necessarily always bleeding edge, so they're not always like serverless, Kubernetes, Terraform, and all this kind of stuff. I do tend to, like my current role, for example, they're looking at using OpenShift on top of AWS, and they want that to be the Kubernetes solution. Not entirely sure why EKS isn't a thing. I'm not entirely sure. It might be something to do with the fact they've got a lot of on-prem as well, and they're migrating. Then some of that isn't being migrated into the cloud, and so maybe they just want to sort of create this ambiguous blob of compute that just spans across boundaries. So the role that I'm currently in is about uplifting and shifting technologies from a very old state and modernizing them, as well as practices, helping them with their automation, stuff like that. So for me, that role is very interesting because it's about automation, it's about improving processes, making people's lives easier. So for me, that's a really interesting role, and the culture is one of great flexibility. So they had no issues with me at all doing a Wednesday stream, for example, with you guys coming on, going off the clock for 2 hours so I can do an hour stream with you guys on a Wednesday. They had that was just like, yeah, sure, no problem whatsoever. They do a 1 day per week, or maybe 1 day every 2 weeks, where we go into the office, into the central office, and they just kind of said, if you can make it, you can make it. If not, that's okay. That's sort of like a good attitude to have. It's like, if I have to work from home for a reason, then I have to work from home, and it's not challenge, it's not a problem, and so on and so forth. So I found a role that's interesting and a culture that I knew going in was highly recommended and was a good culture to go into. So I would actually say that you need to define what a good role looks like to you, a good culture looks like to you, and then try and find a company that sort of gives you both these things. But what I would say is almost like a bit of a warning. I would say that things change, times change, companies change, people change. You may go into a culture that's great today and a role is great today, but I want to speak to two things there actually. So the role is great today because the technology is great today. But the thing is most businesses don't want to be constantly changing technologies all the time. Once they've solved the problem and then they're building on that problem, they don't want to replace Ruby Rails with Python Django a year down the line. That's a huge rewrite. They don't want to then take that and build it into microservices based on Go. They then don't want to take that and build it into something else and something else a year later. Most businesses don't want to do that. So if the role is great today because the tech is great today, give it a year or two down the line and your job is going to be to maintain that tech, and very unlikely that you're going to be modernizing going forward. So you've got to think long term with these kind of roles. As for the culture, if the culture is great today, awesome. Congratulations, you found a great company to work for. Problem is that times change, and although executives do tend to stick around for a long time, if you were hired under a particular executive who works in a particular way that created that culture, and you're replaced by an executive who thinks very differently to that executive than the previous executive, I should say, then the culture can change. I do remember reading an article a while back, and I think it was called it was something like "Don't Take Away My Fizzy Drinks" or "Don't Take Away My Soda," and it was about an engineering firm, software engineering firm in New York, I believe it was, who had a really nice culture. And after a short while, after a few years, a new CFO came in, and the first thing that the CFO observed was, what's this $30,000 per year sort of line item here? And someone explained that it was essentially the fizzy drinks, the cereal, the free food that the engineering teams consumed. It was about $30,000 a year. It's a very large company. We're not talking like 5 people in a room here. If 5 people in one room could get through $30,000 worth of cereal in a year, I'd be very impressed. I'd also be extremely worried for their health. But the CFO wanted to make an impact, right? First 90 days, how do I make this impact? Completely scrap that entirely. Then went to the board of directors and go, look how good I am. I've just saved the company $30,000 per year straight off the bat. I think, if I remember the article rightly, something like 40% of the engineering team handed in their notice on the spot, because those engineers that handed in their notice pretty much on the spot were mature, experienced engineers that had been in the market for a while. They knew that meant a severe cultural shift. And so half the team basically left. And that $30,000 line item, all of a sudden, that wasn't really $30,000 line item wasn't really that big of a line item versus the now amount of money it costs to hire to replace those people. So there's a very bad move there from management, but it meant a shift in culture. So consider what a good role means to you. Consider what a good culture means to you, and ask lots of questions during the interview, and express what you want. This is what a good role looks like to me. This is what a great culture looks like to me. This is something you can afford. This is something that you can offer. Speak to the company, ask lots of questions. I've been in interviews where it's been like 15, 20 minutes because the staff have just opened up straight away and said, this is a really great place to work. I love it here. I've done a little bit of research on LinkedIn prior and been told this is really great. And so I've gone in and the interviews last 20 minutes. But if you're given an interview for an hour and they're like, it's over in like 15, 20, and they say, got any questions? Use that 40 minutes. Start asking questions. What's your tech stack? What's my laptop going to be? Am I going to get a Mac? I don't like Mac. I like working on Windows. Or I'd like working on Mac. Why are you giving me a Windows laptop? Do you use virtual desktops? Or do I have to RDP into a system and develop from that system? It's going to be sluggish and slow. There's a lot of latency there. I have to do that right now for my current engagement. And it's workable, but it is slow. And it can be a little frustrating. Just for the record, I would have still taken the role, but that was something that I should have asked during the interview that I didn't, but I sort of knew ahead of time. Use that time to ask questions. What's the culture like? What are the people like? What are the holidays like? How often am I going to be doing on-call? How often are you going to ask me to work on weekends? Use the interview to find out whether it is the right role and culture for you based on you predetermining ahead of time what a good role and a good culture looks like for you. But also just remember that when you go into a job, those things may change. What do you guys think? Jaxel, thank you for the question, mate. Welcome back to stream. How do you balance your career and learning new technologies, keeping your knowledge and skills up to date with your personal life? Yeah, we just actually discussed that very briefly. See, I told you, Julius, it was a question that a lot of people are very keen to understand. I basically came to the conclusion that you're either the type of person who really enjoys IT to the point where when you leave work at the end of the day, you go home and you keep tinkering. And the reason you keep tinkering is because it's something that you love doing. And so if you've been at your workplace for 2 years, let's say it's Python Django on AWS using Elastic Beanstalk. That's how they deploy. And you really want to see if it can be containerized. So you go to your boss and your boss says, we don't have time for that. We're really understaffed. We're trying to hire, but we're really understaffed. Okay, fair enough. You've got a choice there. You can either just accept that and keep doing your BAU work and doing no innovative work, or you can choose to spend maybe your lunch break or an hour in the morning. In fact, I'll come back to the hour in the morning thing. That's something that a lot of people don't want to do or don't realize how powerful, but I'll come back to that in a second. But essentially, you're going to have to go outside of work and study containerizing that Python Django framework, moving over to EKS by building your own EKS cluster. Maybe you can get your boss or your company to let you to fund that. They can say, tell you what, you can use the AWS dev account outside of working hours from home to innovate, but you just can't innovate within working hours because we just don't have the scope for that. And in some cases, that's acceptable. In some cases. So you're going to have to make a choice as to whether you want to grow as a person and then you want to spend time. So let's say you then go home and for the next 2 to 3 weeks, you spend an hour to 2 hours every day before work, after work, whenever. And you containerize the application, you pop it into EKS cluster that you're managing with EKS CTL, or maybe you did it via Terraform. You've built out this cluster, you've containerized this application, you've got it running, you've got it bouncing. You take it even further, you start shifting a database over into RDS. Let's say the database is currently on a couple of EC2 instances, and you're like, let's get this in RDS. Let's get AWS backups going on the EC2 instances and on the cluster, and let's get Prometheus and Grafana in there, and let's start pulling metrics from the app. And that's actually changed the app. That's changed the app so that it's actually pushing metrics into Prometheus. And after a couple of weeks, you realize, I've got a good grasp on this, and this is really what I want to be doing. You can now present that to work. You've got a couple of choices. You can go back and you present that to work, and they can either go, that's really good, let's start working towards adopting that, or they can just say, that's cool, but back to work. At that point, you need to be looking for another job, unfortunately. You don't really have any other say in that regard, because that employer isn't interested in innovating in that way. The other option you've got, if you're not the type of person that likes to tinker outside of work, like you don't enjoy it, there's, again, the only real choice is to find another job. If you're quite if you're naturally in love with technology and you like tinkering, I don't think it's really that big of an issue. You'll probably just do it anyway. Coming back to the hour in the morning, most people will, they'll get up, they see the morning as the opportunity where they get up, they have a coffee and some breakfast, maybe a shower, and then they just go to work. But if you shift your evening back by an hour to an hour and a half, and your morning wake up time by an hour, if you get up in the morning, have your breakfast, have your coffee, and then use that hour to play around and tinker with some code, it's a very powerful way is to get up early and use the mornings to use this tech so that by the time you finish your work day, you're feeling deflated, you're feeling tired, you're feeling exhausted, and you don't really want to do any additional sort of studying or work or programming. Another option, which, well, they're not mutually exclusive, it's either and or. It's sorry. When you finish work, you go and do literally 10-15 minutes of cardio exercise. I use Apple Fitness. I jump on the TV, I turn that on, I do a HIIT program, it's 10 minutes, done. Strength program, it's 10 minutes, it's done. I go get a shower and I'm pumped. I have loads of energy. Then I can just go and sit at a laptop and program Go for 3 hours. Well, I say program Go. What I do is I hit the keyboard, make the code look like Go, and then I look at the 75 compilation errors and then I fix them. So I sort of program Go. Julio programs Go. I don't program Go. I mash out something that looks like Go. So yeah, it's a good question, Jaxel. I've taken a note to answer it in a more thorough way, and I'm going to come up with some strategies around how people can do that. But it is a good question, and it can be difficult to do. But I feel that, unfortunately, depending on your work and who you work for, that comes back to the whole role and culture thing. You've got to pick a good culture that lets you do that. Like, for example, you might be like, oh, Google want to hire me to do Python Django, but I'm really bored of that. However, the culture says that I get 20% per week or an entire day, an entire Friday or an entire Monday or whatever, to do whatever I want with my time in order to innovate and thingy. So do I want that? Is that something that I want? And that's what I'm talking about the whole role and culture thing. Julio says, management have to understand sometime that base salary is what a worker need, but incentive is what a worker will choose to work at a company. Yeah, there's the base salary can be important. I like to think that we work in an industry where the base salary tends to be sort of high anyway, regardless of what you're doing. It tends to be generally quite high anyway, or at least highly livable, like comfortable. I'm on 1,100 Australian dollars per day, and sometimes I get recruiters who they approach me and they say, "Oh, look, is $1,100 a day okay?" And I think to myself, if I complained about earning $1,100 a day, then I need to be beat within an inch of my life, because who the hell would complain and go, "Yeah, $1,100 a day? I don't know. I wouldn't get out of bed for that. It's a bit of a rough wage, that, isn't it?" It's like, are you kidding me? Like, that is a crazy wage. That is an absolutely mental wage. Like, if you're earning $800 a day for playing around with this technology, I can't even believe people actually pay me to do this. You can't complain. You just simply cannot complain. I remember back home in England, north of England, being on £15,000 a year. A year. Now I'm on. Let's work it out. Let's do some maths, yo. Let's get this sorted. What am I on now? One. Okay, so let's swap this Australian dollar versus what I was earning at home. Let's have a look. What we got here? £583 a day. That's absolutely crazy. And if we look at 500, if we do that and we multiply that by a standard sort of working year, which is about 240 days of the year, according to Google, an average work year is about 240 days. That's £139,000 a year. Who's complaining about that? Like, I wasn't even complaining when I went from 15, and after about a year I jumped to 21, and then I went to 23, and I was like, I'm in the north of England, 21 grand a year ain't bad at all. You can live pretty goddamn nice. You can have a really good life in the north of England for that kind of money. Then I went to 23, and then I went to 35, then I went to 36, then I went to 45, and then I was on 120k. Do you know how much so 139k a year, do you know how much the Prime Minister of England, of the UK makes, unless it's changed? How much UK Prime Minister makes? I think it's like 120,000 a year base. Johnson entitled to, oh, okay, so it's gone up now, so it's 161,000. I'm almost earning them the same amount of money as the effing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I mean, obviously, he's the Prime Minister, he's well networked, he's going to be very wealthy, he's going to be doing other stuff. You've got earnings like, you got 79,000 in expenses and things like that, but I mean, freaking hell, when you're earning almost the same as the Prime Minister of the country, you got no complaints. So wage for me doesn't really come into it when I look at roles and culture, because I know I can always earn a very, very good, comfortable wage. That's why I say look at the role and look at the culture, because ultimately you can almost go anywhere and get a good wage in this industry. How many years experience do you have? Okay, so let's have a think. Let me bring up my profile. We'll go over it together, because obviously my LinkedIn profile is indeed public. So let's go over this. So here in Australia, about 6-7 years in Australia as a DevOps engineer. So there's actually one missing here. So I did lead consultants at Contino, and that was actually working for BHP, who are a massive mining conglomerate. I currently work for Suncorp. So I'm going through an agency and I work for Suncorp. Suncorp are a large bank/insurance company, primarily insurance, but they're also a bank as well. Then did DevOps for Esri Australia, then worked for the state government for a couple of contracts here. This one here is actually the police. So the PSBA is basically, they're governed by the police. Flight Centre are very large. Cranky Doggy will know who Flight Centre are. They're pretty much sort of like a sweetheart of Australia. They're taking a bit of a hit at the moment. There's Jumbo that I looked up before on Glassdoor. And then as an SRE, as a cloud engineer, but I was actually an SRE over at Silverrail. iTalk, big AWS consultancy, XVT, and then I did a few here for QTAC. I actually don't even have my entire experience here, because I tend to only keep about 5 years on there, because I just don't want to list every single employer, because it would go down. It'd be about 6 pages. It'd be pretty mental. So just in Australia alone, about 6 years in just in Australia alone, and then in the UK, probably another 5, about 11 years worth of experience. So altogether, I would say probably about 8 years worth of experience doing what you might consider bits of DevOps in the UK. So like little bits of DevOps in the roles. And then as I've come to Australia and set up my own consultancy, that's spread out, and I'm doing pure DevOps and doing more of it as things go on. But this is me. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you haven't, especially you, Cranky Doggy, so I can work out who the hell you are. Let's have a look. And that's why I said incentive, since a lot of Silicon Valley, we are linked. Oh, damn it. Silicon Valley company, I have a game room, cinema room, snacks, incentives. One of the common incentive, for example, is education incentive, where the company reimburse if you apply and pass a cert. Okay. Yeah, okay. I think it would be, I don't like the reimbursement if you pass. I think it should be a case of they just pay for it, because ultimately it's within their interest to pay for it. Also, tech is one of the only few fields where most, if not all, cases effect plus skill correlate to pay. Yeah. Oh, you're having fun, are you? Blowing my brain up. You said a long grey beard, so I can only think that you're... Did we work together at Jumbo Interactive by any chance? Were you my team leader at Jumbo Interactive? Nope. Big grey beard, and it's not Grant. You're not Grant. I don't really remember other people. Did you have a big... did we work together at IIX? Now Cloud Connect? Nope. Oh, Jesus. You're going to boil my brain, man. It's fun, though. You're right. This is fun. Whee! Okay, there's that DDoS I was talking about before. Couldn't believe it. Just sent you a connect. Thanks, Julio. All right, where are we now? So what are your working hours, role or company? Right, let's have a look at the other question I had. This one is something I'm going to record for Adrian, who isn't here, so he's going to lose out. Let's see if Adrian's about. There he is, Adrian. You about? I'll record it anyway, so... yeah, so what happens with these streams is tomorrow my brother will come into work and he will take the stream file, he'll cut it up into a larger stream, put some B-roll in there, and then he'll then cut out all these little questions that I'm doing, and then they'll all go out Tuesday. They go out at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday for us, which means that they'll hit you in the US at about half 8 in the morning in the US. So today's stream is available to watch, as well as all the highlighted sections in the morning on a Monday. And then the same for Wednesday stream will hit you on Thursday morning. So if you miss it, that's how it works. what it's like doing DevOps at an enterprise-sized company. So I'll speak to this from my perspective. Again, remembering that I'm a contractor, so I move around a lot. You just saw my LinkedIn for those watching the stream. And if you go and look at my LinkedIn, then you'll see that I've worked for some pretty large organizations. So off the top of my head, you've got the Queensland State Government, not really an enterprise per se, but they're still extremely large. You've got Suncorp, massive bank, about 18,000 employees. And then we've got BHP as a mining company, who are about 88,000. And then, although not a large enterprise, we've got like Flight Centre, who are pretty big. And then you've got Esri, who again weren't massive, but they were in the enterprise space. So I've worked at an enterprise level for some pretty large companies, and I've done both private and public sector. So I guess I feel qualified to answer sort of the question what it's like doing DevOps at an enterprise size company. So essentially, it varies incredibly wildly. So the first thing I think I should do is define DevOps. So essentially, DevOps is about, we've got an idea, we want to write some software to solve that idea. What does the whole end-to-end process look like from the ideation through to the customer using the software? It's actually being delivered to the customer via a web browser, a static binary, or whatever it is. And DevOps goes across that entire spectrum, and it talks about communicating, planning, talking to each other, ideation, all this kind of stuff at the very beginning here. Lots of collaboration, lots of planning, breaking all those tasks down, and then you get to sort of a next step over, which is this is where then the dev and the ops essentially comes into it from a title perspective, and the developers and the operations team are now working very tightly on that plan and all of those components that have been broken down. They're now looking at talking to each other, and this is the critical part, is they're looking at talking to each other and going, well, what tech stack are you going to use? What languages are we going to use? What CI stack are we going to use? Where are we going to store our code? What Git workflows are you going to use? How are we going to patch servers? Are we going to use Kubernetes? What cloud provider? Are we going multi-cloud? Are we going to try and abstract it with something like Kubernetes, and so on and so forth? So there is a lot that goes on here. But then the next stage then is going into the sort of operations CI perspective. And this is where like your SRE sort of slots into that DevOps umbrella. I want to talk about this at another point, but I want to point out that I believe that SRE fits into the DevOps umbrella. Brandon, one of our staff members here on the DevOps Lounge, works at a huge scale as an SRE and agrees that if you're doing SRE, you're not necessarily doing DevOps, but if you're doing DevOps, then you are doing SRE, or you can do SRE. So then you get to the end of the DevOps cycle, and that's all about automating all the workflows in order to create an extremely tight software release cycle within an organization. So that's essentially what DevOps aims to do. But just don't forget that it's not just this technical side on the right, it's also this communication side over here on the left, about the collaboration, communicating and breaking down silos and sharing knowledge, etc. So that's very sort of high level, quick overview of what DevOps is. So how does that work in reality in big enterprises? So the first note that I have here is big enterprises are fragmented. They are really fragmented. So one of the organizations I mentioned previously, they had a desire to move people over to infrastructure as code using Terraform. So for them, that's sort of like going, well, what does that look like? We've got tons of applications spread out across hundreds of pieces of software. I think they had about 650 projects, individual software projects developed individually, 650. So they were huge, absolutely massive. And with each software solution becomes a department, and with a department comes a layer of management. And then that layer of management is then different for every single one of those projects. Every single one of those little projects has this layer of management on top that's different. They have their own principles, they have their own values, and therefore it's extremely difficult to get standard across the board in a very large enterprise from a DevOps perspective. One organization will gladly use Terraform, but they may not do it to any sort of standard, whereas the next department within a large organization will use standards to the best of their ability. And so you get very different contrasting code bases there, where this is just really difficult to maintain, and this one is very highly polished and extremely easy to maintain. So I tend to find that there are no standards across the board. I tend to find it's very, very difficult to easily move between these business units within a large enterprise environment, because you're almost starting again, essentially. Almost starting again. The second note I've got here, which is one of those clients did exactly this. Most enterprise organizations try and create a centralized cloud team. And so one of those organizations essentially wanted a team that focused on providing Terraform modules and code bases to extremely high standard, IAC, infrastructure as code, CI pipelines around that code, so that customers, obviously other departments, could then consume those modules knowing that they're going through a certain strict set of standards regarding testing, linting, static analysis. So they did a Terraform FMT, did a Terraform validate, and then they did a TFSec. That was the very basic pipeline they just had in place to begin with, and then it was going to organically grow from there. And that was in front of every single module, so that customers could look at those modules and say, I know that that's being tested to a relatively high standard, much higher than what we would do ourselves, based on industry best practice. They wanted things like Sentinel into Terraform Cloud and so on and so forth. So they attempted to do that. But the problem is, the team itself had no authority to tell other teams that they had to use the Terraform modules. So every single business unit, all like 650 of them, could really just say, nah, because the team couldn't mandate and the management above them weren't willing to mandate, because you've got politics, you've got people in the way. So they don't have the authority to say, you have to use these modules. They can only do basically their job was to do the best job they could to make the modules as attractive as possible to get other business users to use those modules. So it's very difficult in a large enterprise because of the fragmentation to build any kind of standards, especially when there's no authority given to enforce those standards. Different teams use different tech is another point. So obviously with those examples, 650 units, that software could be written in virtually anything. Could be written in Go, could be written in Python, could be written in Java. So all of that different tech means that it is actually quite hard to standardize in some cases. And so you're going to find that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts, and all those moving parts are made from different components. And so it's actually can be quite difficult to get DevOps practices in. It's almost as if you can't really do DevOps at an enterprise level. You can only do DevOps at a sub-enterprise level, i.e. within the individual business units within inside of the enterprise, because attempting to do it across the entire board and get everyone on board may not be feasible, may not work. And so you might just have to say to individual teams, you have to do DevOps in this way, you have to use Agile, you have to do this, so on and so forth. We're agreeing on these particular tech stacks. Moving forward for anything new that's built, anything that's existing, we're going to start deprecating and look at moving over. But overall, it's extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult. If you're going to take a job in a large enterprise as a DevOps engineer, my advice would be to see whether you're working on something existing or something new. If you're working on something new, something greenfield within that enterprise, then it could be a fun adventure in a large environment with lots of money. However, if it's something that's existing, then brace yourself for a lot of BAU, a lot of red tape, and a lot of difficulty trying to get new ideas in. It's the unfortunate reality of large enterprises. Teams that are using the same tech won't implement it correctly. So again, going back there, Terraform, one team uses Terraform, another team uses Terraform, but one team might not have any Terraform expertise on it, but they want to use it. And so the code quality is going to be very different. The implementation is going to be very different. One's going to be a very low quality and one's going to be very high quality, because one team does have Terraform expertise and the other team does not. So it's going to be very different implementations across the board. Enterprise orgs will adopt a tool and end up with amateurish code powering critical systems. Sort of, I've duplicated my note a little bit there, but what I'm saying there is, again, if there's a new tool that comes on board that does solve a problem, but there's no talent, or the company, the culture doesn't permit innovation and testing and trying new ideas, then you'll find that tools will just be put in place in a really rough manner. It's very rough behind the ears, very rough around the edges. And so you're just going to get a really poor amount of quality. What else have I got here? So yeah, and other problems. So DevOps isn't always implemented in a complete fashion. So we just had a little overview there of what DevOps is. Agile sometimes isn't used. I've gone in and there's been some kind of mix between sort of like Scrum and Kanban, or Prince and Scrum. and you get like these kind of like really strange sort of like pseudo DevOpsy practices. It's very difficult to stick to the Agile manifesto that I accept, but most organizations will try and create something that they think fits their culture better, and it can result in some extremely odd ways of working. Despite the fact that DevOps also attempts to break down silos, enterprises have massive, very tall, thick-walled silos, and pretty much always will have. There'll always be that one guy that's been there for 8 years and knows everything, versus the newbies that hardly know a thing, because documentation is extremely difficult to get right, and it can be slow to get things in place. This is generally just an enterprise thing, not necessarily a DevOps thing, but from a DevOps perspective, it is about iterating tight feedback loops. It's about taking feedback with regards to what's happening, what customers want, metrics that you're seeing, and so on and so forth, and trying to get changes in place to solve that can be difficult, even when it's actually affecting the product itself. Unless money is being lost, then that tends to be quite a good motivator for management to move on and allow you to actually try something new. But other than that, it can be very slow, and it can be very, very difficult to get any sort of change in place. So that's my opinion on what it's like doing DevOps at an enterprise-sized company. It's extremely fragmented. Let's have a look at the comments on Reddit first. Let's have a look at what we've got here. I think one of the biggest diffs is probably multi-department integration. Yep, that's really hard. And that's probably why DevOps for a large-scale, multi-project company also need to maintain and develop developer portal. Yeah. It's, oh yeah, Backstage.io. Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah, I have actually seen this in the past. This is by someone big, isn't it? Didn't someone big create this? Made Spotify, yeah, okay. Yeah, Spotify. I've not looked at this in a while, actually. I do need to consider looking at this better. But I remember seeing something like this. Now the CNCF. Okay, cool. Really cool. I'm going to check that out, actually. What are the comments here on Reddit? Let's have a look. My experience with DevOps at enterprise companies included the things you described, but a much smaller scale, much developer focused. The things you described, like building out architecture, would likely be referred to as team of architects, and you would be implementing their design. If you're lucky and not at an enterprise with toxic inter-department politics, you may get a say in that process. You also wouldn't find yourself in a situation where you're heavily involved in both the code and the pipeline. Your work would more often than not be mostly CI/CD, infrastructure, and aforementioned developer support. Yeah. From my experience with only developers, it was only DevOps on paper and had to do a crap ton of corporate warfare without much success. Too many micromanagers were focused on saving their positions, and they saw automation as a way to replace them, as nobody would need them. And I can see where he's coming from there, or where they're coming from there, I should say. What they're saying there is that people were trying to save their own skins. Someone at a past engagement said to me once, I want to use Terraform. I approached the manager here, and I said we should use Terraform to build out this new infrastructure in Azure. And the manager replied, how quickly would it be to do it manually? Now, I can see where the manager's coming from. Is doing it manually. Is doing it manually going to be quicker than doing it in Terraform? But it is a tone-deaf sort of question, because it completely ignores all the benefits of doing things with code. So this does hit home, unfortunately. Have you ever been kicked in the nuts only to be told they shouldn't have been in the way? Yeah, that's working at an enterprise. Put your nuts in the cloud. It's a best practice. Love it. Tends to be a lot more segmented, so an individual team as part of a platform team will be responsible for all the things you've mentioned, but on a much narrower scope. Yeah. It can be tough. Who here works at a large enterprise? We've got a few people there. Amit, Shamar, welcome mate. Keenson, welcome back. Any of you chaps or ladies work at a large enterprise? I know a lot of our DevOps Lounge engineers are. Brandon's at a very large company. We've got DevOps Pro Dude, who is I think was at Nike. I don't know if he's at Nike anymore. I don't remember. I never remember, but I think he was at Nike or is at Nike. And I know that Dan Manners is at Cisco, which is really big. Jexel, saying, oh wow, Red Hat. Okay, very cool. Okay, cool. Well, so we've got some large companies then. I think Red Hat will be interesting because it is an enterprise, I guess, but it's sort of an enterprise that's serving other enterprises. So that'll be an interesting take. on the whole working at an enterprise for other enterprises sort of angle. So that will be interesting. Let's move on to the next question. There is no web page. This is something that I did see, but this is also where they deleted the question. I don't know what's with the DevOps subreddit and people deleting questions and then deleting their accounts. It's a really odd practice, but people seem to do it. So the question that came through was, is development or operations better for getting into DevOps? So if I'm going to make a move into DevOps from any current position, what's better, development or operations? Well, the answer is actually both. So you're going to want a bit of both, but to be honest with you, you're going to want more operations than you're going to want development. So development is important in understanding sort of DevOps practices, again, because industry standard is moving towards a model of doing things as code, and that obviously requires being able to program, whereas previously it was all ClickOps and you use UIs and so on and so forth. So there is going to be a need for you to be able to program. You're going to need to be able to learn, I would suggest learning at least Python, because you're going to find that if you're using Jenkins or GitLab CI or any kind of CI platform, really, you're going to need to be able to create CI jobs and scripts that you can run inside of those CI jobs for doing all kinds of automation tasks for you. You may be creating CI jobs that involve a custom snapshot solution for EC2 instances. You don't want to use AWS backup, fine. We need to do something ourselves, so we're going to need some custom solutions. So you would write a Python script, you would adopt the Boto3 library, and then you would essentially then use that to iterate over some EC2 instances and perform some snapshotting with some custom logic around getting rid of old snapshots. So these kind of tasks do come up, and so you will be required to know how to program. However, DevOps, if I'm being honest, is still very heavily right-leaning with regards to, we've got communication, collaboration, and planning over here, and then we've got development, and then we've got operations. It's still very much leaning to the right towards operations. So if you're hired as a DevOps engineer, your day-to-day is going to be CI/CD, infrastructure, AWS cloud. It's going to be 80% to 85% that, and 20 to 15% everything else to the left. So you are going to need a bit of you're going to need some development skills. So I would say Python's a good start. Go is an excellent language for DevOps. It's an excellent systems development language. You're going to need to understand difference between like scripted and compiled, how to compile things, how to run Python scripts, how to handle Python packaging, develop your own packages, maybe run a PyPy server. I don't really like PyPy, but it gets the job done. I do see it a lot, actually, surprisingly. You're going to know how to run tests, TDD, BDD, whatever they are. You're going to have to be able to do these things in a DevOps environment, because you will be expected to either manage them things, either actually take existing code and understand how to run it and test it and package it, compile it. You're going to have to learn how to use things like Artifactory and essentially places where you can store build results from pipelines. You're going to have to learn how to use those developer tools so that you can do the actual operational side of things from a DevOps perspective, which is then deploying those artifacts into a live environment. So you're definitely going to need a bit of development without a doubt. However, it is much more heavily leaning over to the right. It's much more focused on the operations side of things. You are going to be interacting with AWS or your chosen cloud provider far more than you're going to be interacting with a Python code base. You're going to be looking at writing Terraform code far more than you're going to be writing Python code. And you're going to be looking at metrics and backups and disaster recovery, patching, release cycles, and so on and so forth from an operations perspective, far more than you're going to be looking at how to package a piece of software, what library to use in the software, how to compile it, whether to use Artifactory or GitLab's built-in Artifactory storage, and so on and so forth. So yes, you're going to need a little bit of development. However, it's going to be more, you're going to be better off getting more operations experience, in my opinion. I come from a operations heavy background. So network engineering into Linux administration, into Linux, into web hosting, into the web world. So learning how to set up load balancers. These are all physical load balancers, physical servers. Then moving into enterprise grade of the same thing, Oracle RAC, these huge clusters, so on and so forth. And then, of course, cloud comes along, and then that starts changing things, because now you can spin up these things it's all software defined, right? You can spin up these things using APIs, etc. So my background is very operations heavy, and I would say that has been a key. That has helped me get into the DevOps space and be good at DevOps. But also playing around with programming and learning how to programming has, I would say, put me ahead of most people in the DevOps space. Most of them come in from either a programming background or an operations background with no programming experience, and then they struggle with things like Terraform because it's code, and then they struggle with understanding how to. A developer gives them a Python application, a jar file, and is like, this needs to be deployed, and they don't know what that thing is or how to run it. They don't understand that they need a Java runtime in order to execute that jar file and things like that, because they've never done any programming. And so a little bit of both. A little bit of programming, but mostly operations. That would be my take. I did see an article. I had an article actually on Windows 11. Windows 11 is no longer compatible with Oracle VirtualBox virtual machines. This was, yeah, I've not read it yet, but I assume it's because it's Hyper-V. Target computers needed. Let's have a look. Oh, yeah. Was this the one where they're just like, you please use Edge? What's the title? Want to switch your default browser in Windows 11? Microsoft just made it harder. LOL smiley face. Internet Explorer, which was packaged with Windows, was primarily used to download another browser. Didn't they get sued by the EU for this? Didn't they have a massive antitrust lawsuit in the EU over this kind of stuff? This is really, really odd behavior, given that I think that they did receive quite a big lawsuit. However, Microsoft Edge, the company is looking to recoup some of its lost share. Ironically, I actually use Edge, so I don't really have a problem with this. I actually find Edge is really fast. I actually really like it. How to change the default in Windows 10? Perfect. Upcoming changes in Windows 11. With Windows 11, the company is making a few changes. Instead of allowing users to make single switch, you are required to select default browsers. Oh yeah, I remember reading this. File types. Yeah. So every single file type, including like protocols themselves. Oh, okay. So you can basically say I want to use Internet Explorer for HTTP and then Edge for HTTPS, or I can say Firefox for HTTP. That's pretty mental. Oh my God. Someone will write an app that just wraps all this and you just go click and it just changes all that for you without a doubt. That's probably even already been done. Mozilla already did. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. As always, Microsoft Edge will be the default browser when you install Windows 11. This browser is based on Chromium project, and it's incredibly fast. It really is. It's actually so fast. I use it on my iPhone. I use it on here, and I use it on my Mac. Edge is actually really fast. It's actually good now, but Microsoft's still playing catch up. Focus on browsers like Mozilla and Brave. Okay, go to the default settings. Select your web browser, Microsoft Edge. Launch your default apps. Okay, set as default. You need to set your browser's default for each given file and link types individually. It's a hassle, but it's necessary. That is mental. Hang on, including the file types. But what about like .css and .jpeg and .png? So if I visit a URL and I hit a .html file, it'll load in Edge. But if I configure just .html and I hit a URL and I click a URL in Slack with .html on the end, it'll load in Chrome. Why would they even think that was a good idea? That's really bad. What? That's why people are quite annoying. Yeah, make it harder for people. It's pretty nasty. It is definitely a dark pattern. It's really odd. What makes it odd? The oddest thing about this is it's not like the Windows API doesn't allow you to update the registry settings or whatever necessary to change this. So do they really think that no one's going to write an app that does this? Like that app from Mozilla that you mentioned that I've not checked out was probably written in the Windows 11 beta, let alone when it's gone on general availability and now out in the public. It's probably written a long time ago. Oh. I did have another article I wanted to show you guys, actually. Let's pop this in here, pop it in the chat. one is for Firefox, and also welcome malware. Yeah, exactly. Now you're going to have a malware problem because people are going to be like, oh, use my app to change your default settings, and then it's got malware in it. Oh, all right. Let's have a look at this. I saw this. It's really, really cute. I can't remember where I saw it, but it's now somewhat been contained in a blog post that's been found that contain these graphics, but I think I saw them on Twitter. It's basically Git explained with cats, which I think is brilliant. These little cute graphics from this individual person who has drawn them out to help them learn Git. I thought this was a really, really cute way of learning Git. I like the way they build up on a cat. They had like little attributes to the cat, and then you get like your cute little kitty at the end. Meow. Very, very cute. I need a cat sound on my soundboard. I think that's awesome. I like the way they've added in the commits here. So good. Such a great way. Git Purr sound like something else though. Yikes. I just thought that was awesome. I thought I'd share that with you. Let's have a look at this thing as well. I didn't get a chance to read this one. The pitfalls of using SSH agent, or how to use an agent safely. Unfortunately, previous article we talked about how to SSH key and SSH agent. If you're impatient kind of reader, here are a few rules of thumb you should follow. Never ever copy your private keys on a computer somebody else has root on. If you do, you just shared your keys with that person. That's sort of somewhat obvious, really. I should hope that's obvious anyway. Never ever copy your private keys on a computer. If you also use that key from that computer, why would you copy it otherwise? You also shared your passphrase. Essentially, yeah. Okay. Never ever run an SSH agent on a computer somebody else has a root on. Okay. Only forward your agent connection to machines you trust. Make sure, okay, also further down that, yeah, okay. Make sure your keys and your agents are unloaded when you log off your machine. Interesting. If you're one of those old school guys that simply starts his agent with something like this, in his bash RC, don't forget that every time you open a terminal, you're creating a new agent that nobody will ever kill. It will remain happily hanging there forever with all your keys ready for anyone to use. Okay. Okay, to protect my agent forwarding, I personally follow a fifth rule. Use different keys for different purposes and keep them in different agents. Oh, okay, interesting. The reason for this rule is a direct consequence of other rules. It's best explained. Let's say in order to blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a bit overkill personally, but I think I can see where they're coming from. I do use an agent. I find that when I run my SSH agent locally here on Windows 10, and then I use Visual Studio Code locally with the SSH remote functionality, not only does the SSH remote plugin then talk to my Lightsail instance, the agent then allows it to just log in, and it's absolutely fine. It passes the agent through as well. So then when I bring up a terminal in VS Code, I get a bash prompt that then allows me to SSH into boxes from there because my key, which is in Windows, is forwarded through. So that's a very, very powerful concept. So I can see where they're coming from. I like the don't. If you use your SSH agent on a box that someone else has root on, then they have access to the agent as well. That's true, because I believe they can probably just configure their local agent to use the PID of your agent, and they can therefore use those keys. So yeah, this seems like a nice little resource. I'll pop this in here for y'all. Let's have a look at this. By the way, we rate this since keep going pop up on trends every few days. DevOps Exercises. Ooh, let's have a look. 15,000 stars. Let's get that starred. Let's have a look. This repo contains questions and exercises on various technical topics, sometimes related to DevOps and SRE. There are currently 1,726 questions, so just a handful then. To learn more about DevOps SRE, check out the resources. Okay, let's do that. You can use these for preparing for an interview, but most of these question exercises don't represent an actual interview. Please research FAQ for more details. I like that. Join our DevOps community on Facebook. Really? Ooh. That seems a bit gross. I'll check that out though. So they got all these questions. Interesting. Okay. Have a little look here. I click on go. What else from character? Okay. I could use this to do mock interviews, couldn't I? That's a service I wanted to offer people for a very small fee, was just do some of my time to just do a mock interview at a company. I wonder if that's something that would be useful for people. I find career advice is very heavily in demand at the moment, so that's why I'm sort of looking at questions like what's it like doing DevOps in an enterprise environment, because people seem to be very keen to understand what that genuinely looks like. So this kind of thing would be really helpful to piggyback off the back of. Terraform. Let's have a look at the Terraform ones. How do you structure your Terraform projects? Okay, Terraform directory. That could be a bit neater, but okay. Terraform follows the immutable infrastructure paradigm. False. Terraform follows immutable infrastructure paradigm. Okay. True or false? What is HashiCorp configuration language? Oh, okay. It's a language HashiCorp made to use a configuration for a number of its tools, including Terraform. Okay. This is really good. This would be really good for me to share with clients as well, and just say, if you're interviewing people, here are some questions. I'd want to refine it down a bit though, because generally speaking, in an interview, no interview's going to sit there and ask all of these questions from top to bottom. You're generally going to find, you're going to pick maybe one or two from each sort of segment and come up with maybe 3 or 4. And you also want to go on a scale of sort of 1 to 10 in terms of difficulty. So you want to kind of, like, explain remote state. When would you use it? Explain state locking is sort of an intermediary Terraform concept. If I was hiring a junior, I would ask the question. If they didn't know, I'd be like, okay, they're definitely junior. So I really like this. This is awesome. Thanks for pointing this one out. Containers exercises. Really good. Okay. I can see this being extremely powerful. Wow. So many technologies as well. Excellent. Oh, I like these AWS. They've got AWS ones. That's good. What is IAM? No idea. Couldn't answer that. EC2. Elastic Cats. What are the differences? Awesome. Love it. I like it. It's so good. It got added to the bot. Okay. Let's do one final question that I wanted to cover, which I thought was a really, really good question. What do you wish you knew about Ansible when you were starting out? So there's lots of answers to this below, but I'll go over it here. Okay, where's my thingy gone? There it is. Okay, so what should newcomers to Ansible know? So my opinion is, the first thing I would say that people who are picking up Ansible for the first time should definitely know is roles. Using roles for repeatable logic and configuration. So when you want to set something up and you want to do it in a repeated manner and you want to configure something and you're doing it across multiple environments, the moment you've sort of got 2 or more environments, you want that thing to be repeatably configurable and installable. So a good example of this is we can invent 4 roles now for a fictitious sort of situation. So let's say that we've got a Drupal installation, which is going to require PHP, FPM, MySQL, and Nginx. So we're just going to need those 4 things. So with Ansible, you can create these things called roles, which can contain lots of configuration and files and tasks and templates and lots of things that you can do. Even custom modules can be within the context of a role and stored inside the role. And then those roles can then be freely distributed amongst your organization or even sort of everyone else around the world kind of thing. So with a role, you would create a role in our example. You would create one for Nginx, for example, basically. So you would install Nginx inside of the role. You would move configuration files around. So the person consuming the role would say, this is going to be my nginx.conf. These are going to be my site configurations, and so on and so forth. And then those things would get uploaded by that role to the remote server. You do the same for PHP FPM. I want PHP FPM. I want PHP FPM to be this version. I want this config. I want to do this. I want to do that, and so on and so forth. The same for Drupal. It would download Drupal on the remote system, unzip the file, put it in the right place, etc. And the same for MySQL as well. Just install a package of a particular version, and so on and so forth. So each role, these 4 roles, would do one job, and it would do one job really, really well. And it would contain everything necessary to manage, configure, and sort of keep active those specific things: Nginx, Drupal, PHP FPM, and MySQL. So for the MySQL role, for example, we extend it further, and it can even do things like execute SQL against the MySQL server for you and bootstrap it. So there's a lot that you can do within a role. The next key concept then is you then consume those roles in playbooks. And in my opinion, you're going to have a better time if a playbook represents a solution. So in our example, we want to deploy Drupal. We want to deploy and we want to manage Drupal across multiple environments. So I would create a playbook literally just called Drupal. And in there, I would have a couple of plays. I'd have a first play at the top, and it would run against hosts' databases. So it would only execute against the database servers, and it would consume that MySQL role, and it wouldn't have any configuration in it. It wouldn't configure that role in any way. We'll come to that in a second. And then I'd have a second play that then addresses web servers, and the web servers would then consume the Nginx, PHP-FPM, and the Drupal role to get those things in place. And it would draw facts down from the previous play from the database server. So you would set facts on those servers in order to things like the database username and password, the database name, and so on and so forth. You would pull in those facts into your second play, and you would provide them to, say, the Drupal role so that it can configure its configuration so that it knows where to find its database engine. Once you have your playbook and it's working fine, you'll want to essentially be able to run the same playbook against different environments and get different configuration. So this is where inventories and group variables come into play. So your inventory will be, say, production.yaml, development.yaml, test.yaml. And inside of the inventory, you can define a lot of different things in an inventory. They can get very complicated, but you'll specify hosts, groups of hosts, and so on and so forth. So in our example, in production, you'll have two groups. You'd have the databases group and the web servers group. And you would call one such as production databases and production web servers. And what you're saying there is, because you're given the hosts a group with a particular name, when you execute the playbook Drupal and you provide it with the production inventory, you're also saying to it, I want you to run that playbook against these hosts in this particular group. What Ansible will then do, it'll go and look for group vars for that particular group. So it will go and look for the production databases group, and then it will then read those variables in, and it will apply them globally to the Terraform run. And then any roles that are then looking for those variables will consume those values. And so what we can do there is we can now create multiple inventories. You can have one inventory with all multiple groups in, or you can create multiple inventories for each environment, and then you can define group vars to pull in changes. So production might use an older version of MySQL. It's more stable, more secure. You just want stability. You want things to just operate. Whereas dev might use the bleeding edge, uses the very late, just installs the latest of everything. And so the group vars for that particular inventory will be different, so that therefore when the playbook executes and the roles execute, the configuration that are fed through are different to what production sees. So therefore you get different configuration on the remote end. So that's where I would use roles playbooks and inventories mixed with group vars. So that's how people should be organizing their code in order to create an Ansible code base that's very, very simple to maintain. Another thing I would recommend really getting to grips with is Ansible Vault. I've been in environments in the past where secrets have been in plain text inside of group vars, variable files, and just straight up in playbooks and roles. And there's no real excuse for it. You can't really justify it in any way, in my opinion, for the simple fact that Ansible Vault is native. It's not an extra tool. It's not third party. It's built right in. Ansible-Vault, that's the command. It can do inline secrets encryption. You can encrypt a string and then put that string inside of a variable. So the rest of the YAML file is plain text, but the value of a particular key is an encrypted string. Or you can just encrypt the entire file. So you're not really locked in any way. You can actually encrypt individual items or entire files. And it's super cheap and easy to get in place. And when I say cheap, I mean sort of cognitively and from a technological perspective, because you can use GPG keys or you can just use a password. So if you think about running it locally on your system, you could have the password in a corporate password manager. You then copy the password, you put it on a file hidden away somewhere on your local system. And then when you run your Ansible playbook, you would then just do --vault -password -file, and then you link to the path of that file. And then when Ansible detects, when it sees a value that's vault encrypted or a file that's vault encrypted, it will use that password to decrypt it in memory. So that's hardly any effort at all. If you're doing it in a CI environment, then you would use the password, you put it in a secrets manager, and then when the CI process runs, it goes and fetches it temporarily, puts it on disk, and then uses that same flag and says, there's your password there, and then you just delete it from the runner when you're done. Easy, super easy to get in place. Now you can encrypt those secrets, and if there's a leak in the code, if that repository or the contents of that repository, partial or otherwise, somehow make it into the public domain, everything's encrypted, and it'd be extremely difficult for anyone, if not impossible, to extract those secrets from the file. So Ansible Vault is one of the biggest ones, I would say, that most new starters definitely need to address. It's just quick and easy to get in place. And then the final one I would say is modules. So when you write your roles and when you write your playbooks and you say, I want to use the file module and I wanted to create a file here with these permissions owned by this person with the contents of X, what you're essentially doing there, you're telling Ansible to essentially call a Python script and provide it with those flags. In most cases, 99% of cases, I would say, most Ansible modules are written in Python. But that is essentially all you're doing is you're calling a Python script with a set of flags, and then it gets executed for you on the remote host. Modules aren't actually that difficult to write yourself. I've got an example of one here in the browser that I'm going to bring up in a second, because I was looking at this question earlier. But you can actually find that if you're writing a playbook or a role and you're trying to put together 4 or 5 or more, or even sometimes less modules, and you're trying to get them to do something that's really complicated and it's producing some sort of YAML that is very difficult to read, very difficult to maintain, sort of works, but you're worried potentially about race conditions and so on and so forth, it might actually be easier to just write a module. And writing a module is not difficult at all. I'll switch over now just to this. This is an example module written in Go, and this is just to demonstrate that in actual fact, you don't actually need to even write it in Python. You can write it in any language, because all Ansible actually does is it calls the actual module, the Python, the script behind the module. It calls it as it would a normal command, and it passes in a JSON object on the standard in to that as the first parameter as standard in to that binary, to that application, to that script. And then what it expects to see is a JSON document on the standard out. That's what it expects to see, with a particular structure and certain keys at certain points. So it's not really that difficult to write a module in anything you want. Here, it's just a hello world example. He's got his main function here. He's defined a response object, and the response object here in Go is just a struct. And it produces a JSON document, or at least it can be converted to a JSON document. And it just contains 3 keys: message, changed, and failed. This is what Ansible expects to see. And all he's doing is saying, if you give me an argument of 1, I'm going to parse that into JSON, which is just sort of the text. And then I'm going to marshal that. I'm going to unmarshal the arguments that came in on the command line, right? They came in on the command line. So I'm going to marshal it into JSON, and then I'm just going to set the name, module args.name, to the name that you gave me. I'm going to set the message to be hello name, and then I'm just going to return a JSON response on the standard out. So I'm just going to print that out. Here's an example use of this playbook. So what you would do with this Go is you would compile it, and then in your playbook you can see it's just doing name, hello world, and it's just doing hello. It's just calling it directly. Underneath he's doing hello, and then he's providing the value name to Ansible. So then the result is hello Ansible. And then if we go down, we can see the output here for the various things. So we've got hello world here. So it's got various connections, and you can just see it's printing out hello world. And then where it's actually specifying a name parameter, we can see it's saying hello Ansible, and so on and so forth. So modules aren't really that scary. They're not this really difficult thing that you have to be afraid of. You'll find that if you're writing a lot of tasks and stitching together lots of modules to try and get some complex logic done, you might actually be better off just learning how to write and just writing a module. And if Python's all you know, then don't worry about it. Just write it in Python. If Go's all you know, then just use Go. If Java's all you know, then you can possibly get away with using Java as well. It doesn't really matter, but it is an incredibly powerful way to augment your Ansible experience and encase custom complex logic into just a very simple module that then in your Ansible you just call a module, provide it with a few flags, and you get the desired result. So to answer the question, in summary, what do you wish you knew about Ansible when you were starting out? Use roles to do one job well. Use playbooks to represent a solution. In our example, Drupal.yaml, WordPress.yaml, MySQL.yaml, whatever it is, and just have that playbook manage that one thing. Use inventories and group variables in order to configure. So when you run the playbook, you set up the configuration that the roles and everything you use to build out the environment that they manage. Use Ansible Vault to manage secrets, encrypt inline or encrypt entire files. I'd recommend just encrypting entire files. It's just easier. You may as well just encrypt everything. It's free, doesn't cost anything, except a few CPU cycles. And learn how to write modules, and don't be afraid of writing modules. Get that complex logic that you're trying to implement out of the YAML file and trying to stitch together lots of modules, and instead just write a custom module to do the thing directly that you want to do. Simple as that. Thoughts? Opinions? You don't need to know Python. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Wish you were probably told you don't need to know Python. Yeah. I'd say that a good understanding of Python is possibly quite important for Ansible. Joke aside, I think a new person in Ansible should also learn Jinja 2 syntax. Yeah, the templating engine is a very good one as well, definitely. If you have enough time, I'd appreciate if you could review a CI/CD pipeline. It's a diagram at the moment that I'm working on for a pet project. Yeah, I can do that. Let's have a look. Ooh. What have we got here then? So we got GitHub/Git, pre-commit hooks, run unit tests, run lenses. Okay. Then we got then the next stage. So is this in GitHub Actions? So you're doing this in GitHub Actions, I assume. So you got the build, or is it just a generic pipeline? You don't really want to tie yourself to a particular sort of engine. So you got the build stage. You got build a Docker image, scan Docker image for vulnerabilities using Trivy, push to container image registry. Yep, it's GitHub Actions. Okay, cool. In a sense, it doesn't really matter, but I just wanted to clarify. So then you got the test stage. So then you're going to be running unit tests. So start Postgres container, run database migrations, run unit tests in app container. Okay. Static code analysis and vulnerability scanning, Flake 8, safety, and semgrep. Okay, cool. So you got your build stage, you got your test stage, you got your deployment stage. Apply Terraform config, create Postgres RDS instance, create secrets, install Helm, release on Kubernetes cluster, using vars from newly created resources, deploy front-end module, trigger the front-end GitLab. You've got GitLab CI here, but trigger the front-end GitLab CI pipeline via API. So maybe you're mixing a few, or that's just meant to say GitHub maybe. Build front-end static assets, especially... then you do a comment front-end and back-end URL on GitHub issue via API. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, it's meant to say GitHub Actions. All right, cool. Then you say here that you comment front-end and back-end URL on the GitHub issue via API. Okay. Destroy stage, Terraform destroy, blah, blah, blah. Destroy stage will only be ran on branch deletion or merge into master. Therefore, it will never run on main or master. Okay. Let's go back to the beginning. So the pre-commit hooks I like. It's a good idea. The build stage, yeah, you got your Docker image, you're getting your app in there, you're building it, and then you're doing scans, and then you're putting it inside of an image registry, which I assume is either built into GitHub or you're using Docker Hub private repos or something. Whatever it is, it's not really relevant. Okay, do these run in parallel? So you got run unit tests and you got static code analysis, but they don't. One doesn't feed into the other, so I assume that they run in parallel. They look like they could possibly be done in parallel and don't really rely on each other. They look like they could be done in parallel. So you're running unit tests, start Postgres. You probably want to start the Postgres SQL container before you run the unit tests. Do you, maybe? I know unit tests tend to be mocked, but the fact that you're spinning up a Postgres instance probably tells me that maybe you're not using mocks. I hate mocks. I don't use mocks. I just stand up a real database, give me real data, and then I'll test my app works against that data. So I agree. If you're spinning up a Postgres to do that, I think you're onto a good start straight away. So start Postgres container and then maybe run unit tests. I don't know. It depends on whether you've got mocks and stuff. You'll need to let me know whether they are the right way around or whether they're mistaken. Run your database migrations and then run unit tests in app container. So you're running unit tests twice. So I guess that means you've got like sort of TDD tests that are mocked or just looking or using very simple data and just looking at core units that can just be fed a bit of data and you're checking the output is right. And then when you run unit tests in the app container, after you've done the database, I assume that's some sort of like systems integration testing or sort of behavioral driven testing to also determine whether it's behaving correctly against the database with valid data in it. What I would say here Yeah, the unit tests are ran after the container started, but the first run unit test is kind of like a process which is shown below, if it makes sense. It's not very clear, sorry, don't apologize, it's fine. You've asked for my opinion, and I'm giving you from my perspective, this is how I interpret this. And so this advice for you may be everything you need in order to adjust this. So don't be sorry, it's fine. I would say remove the unit tests. If unit tests aren't actually being executed there, I would take that out and just say test stage, stop Postgres, run some migrations, and then run tests in the app. That's what I would do. What I would say on the run database migrations and the database itself is I would say, how do you know what version of Postgres to run? Where does that value come from? So if this pipeline is in a dev environment and it also exists in a production environment, how do you know that the Postgres container is using the right version to reflect the environment that the change is going into? So that would be the first thing I would ask looking at this. The database migrations, how can you ensure that the migrations are the latest? They reflect the data is valid for the semantics, the semantics of the actual database itself, the structure, to ensure that when you're running the tests that you're getting the right data. So I'd just say, where's that data coming from? Again, try to add a note and just sort of say the data is fed in from here. The Postgres version is understood to be configured inside of this stage, and so on and so forth. Unless you just use a static one across the board, which a lot of companies do. But sometimes companies will say, in the dev environment, I want to go up a minor version to see if our application will work with it. How do you do that here? Because that wouldn't work in an automated setting if you've hard coded that version. Static code analysis, brilliant. Flake safety and semgrep. So I assume with your semgrep, you're looking at the version, the semvar version that's being applied to the commit to ensure that there's a tag that has a semvar in it, or you're looking inside a file maybe. That's probably a good idea to make sure it's a valid semvar. Oh, you've got a note actually. Semgrep is configured to use the following rule sets to scan for issues. Oh, okay. Secrets in code bases. I've never used Semgrep. Potential security. Oh, okay, Semgrep. I'll have to look at that. That sounds good. Okay, that's fine. You're doing static code analysis and so on and so forth. Can't complain with that. You got the deployment stage. Apply your Terraform config. Create Postgres SQL. Okay. C note. All steps under apply Terraform config is a single job which consists of multiple actions executed by Terraform to deploy the application and its required components to AWS and a specified Kubernetes cluster and create the front end. So are you using Terraform to create objects within Kubernetes? Is that what you're doing? So you're not actually, so are you building a cluster or are you managing objects in Kubernetes with Terraform, which is fine, if that's how you want to do things. You create secrets, install Helm, release Kubernetes on Kubernetes cluster using values from newly deployed front-end Terraform module. Okay. Trigger front, GitHub Actions, pipeline via API, build the static assets. Okay. So it's a full end-to-end then. The deploy stage, going to drop off, need to sleep. Thanks, Julio. Thanks for coming, mate. Have a good night and sleep well. The Terraform module for the app manages Kubernetes components, etc., and the VPC, security groups, ETS cluster, etc., is in another repo. Okay. Okay, cool. I don't have any concerns. That's a really complex part of the pipeline, so I can't really give you any comments on that, but that looks fine. The comments on the issue. What if there is no issue? Maybe I don't understand. It's been a while since I've worked with GitHub. So if someone commits a branch, does this run on every branch? Because if they just run on a branch, would there be an issue? Or does it create an issue? I'd imagine that it's creating an issue that can then be used to retrieve those URLs. I think I'd have to make some API calls to check if there's an associated issue with the pull request. Yeah, you could update the pull request with a comment. Maybe refer to it as a pull request instead of an issue. Because obviously, if someone pushes a branch, if you want this to execute when there's a branch, then If GitHub lets you put a comment on a branch, then that works fine. If you only have, it depends on when this pipeline runs. Does it run when there's a pull request? That way, you then want to reply to the pull request. So I would just reconsider adjusting the diagram to reflect that. It'll run on every commit, I think. Okay. In that case, then, yeah, if it runs on every commit, then you're going to need to be able to comment on that commit. And so you're going to have to work with what GitHub gives you in terms of the commit ID to then use the API to talk back and say, based on this commit ID, I want to comment and say, here's the URLs that go on. So then the developer can go back to the commit, and then he can look at the comment and go, there's the URLs I need to do some testing with. That's fine. Then you've got destroy stage. So what I do with the destroy stage is I have it so the destroy stage actually only operates on the main or master branch personally, because essentially the main or master branch, we'll refer to it as the main branch going forward. The main branch essentially represents production state. And so in my opinion, if you're going to do a destroy, it should only happen if something triggers it on the main branch. And the way I do it is I have my pipeline look for a .destroy file. The reason I do this is because if you're doing sort of like DevOps and Git flow practices correctly, when I want to destroy an environment, I've got to create a .destroy file. I've got to actively type that out into a terminal. I've got to git add it, so 2 stages. I've then got to git commit it. There's a 3rd stage. I've then got to git push it. I've then got to create the file, I've then got to create a branch, or the other way around. So I've done 2 actions straight away. So create a branch, create a file, add the file, commit the file, push the file, create the pull request. So already I've done 6 things to just even get anywhere near potentially destroying. Then once that's live, I've then got to do the pull request. The pull request then gets reviewed, and then someone can say you're trying to destroy the wrong environment. If the destroy file if the destroy file exists and it's not the main branch, the pipeline, that part of the pipeline will never ever run. I do still issue a plan. So then what I would then do is, if that's then acceptable and someone code reviews it, you can't, by the way, you shouldn't be able to merge your own pull requests. Someone else should have to do a code review and merge that for you. Then when they merge that into main, the pipeline triggers. All this stuff at the front here, everything to the left here of destroy is ignored, and just the destroy stage happens. And even then, I would make it do a plan to show you what's going to be destroyed, which is obviously everything. And I'll come to something else in a second. And I then make the actual Terraform destroy auto approve. I'd make that a manual gate, so someone has to go in and click. Now you've got close to 10 things that you need to do to destroy a stage. So now you need to be really, really sure that you want to destroy stuff. This is especially important in production. You could roll that back for non-prod environments if you really, really wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it. Another thing I would bring in, what was I going to say there? Had an idea there with regards to destroying stuff. Oh, it's gone. Sorry. What I would say is, you're going to have to also think about something that Brandon Ninja and the community, one of our staff members in the lounge, was saying that he recently wanted to be able to provide Terraform destroy with the target flag. So he wanted to be able to destroy specific resources. So brace yourself for that requirement that may come your way. You may find that you're going to need to support being able to do a Terraform destroy on a specific environment in a specific for a specific resource, in a specific environment. So brace yourself for that. That's going to have to come into your logic here, or you're going to have a separate pipeline or something else that does that for you. Whether it's a CI job that you can trigger, whether it's Jenkins, whether it's run deck or something. Yeah. You're welcome. No problem. I hope that was helpful. All right, 1 o'clock. I'm done. Does anyone have any other questions? Does anyone want me to go over anything? Or do we feel sated? Satisfied? Do I ring the dong to say that it's all over? Yeah? Oh, people are typing. Okay, I'll back off. The dong has yet to be donged. No worries. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you coming along. Welcome. Love being here. Love doing the streams. If you want to see a change to the format in any way, let me know. But I'm planning on doing a small news section just to kind of any changes that the cloud providers have announced within within a week. I'll probably only do it on Sundays. I will do that, and then it will just be greet everyone, say hello, and then it'll be question, go to the community, question, go to the community, and then everything gets dumped the next day onto YouTube. And I'm also focusing on looking at producing a lot of content, professional content from a video perspective. So I've got about literally 20 ideas at the moment. So I'm looking at going over a professional video on common Terraform commands, Ansible commands, core AWS services, then be looking at doing a course on how to stand up a website using Terraform in an hour. So a very quick course. Going to be looking at my setup, basically after the Docker desktop fiasco. I'm going to be looking at a Docker desktop alternative, which basically involves not running anything locally at all. Video on salary negotiations. So I'm going to be reaching out to a few people there and getting some tips on there. Using a password manager, just lots and lots of video ideas. So K8, Kubernetes versus Nomad, EKS, EC2 versus Fargate, so on and so forth. Using a local stack for testing Terraform code locally, stuff like that. So lots of video ideas coming. But if you have anything, then head on over to feedback.learndevops.com. Go over to that address. I'll make it a URL. And then you'll find that it will load, and it will load up Canny, and you can go in and you can make any suggestions of any content that you want to see going forward. Thanks very much for your kind words. Great one as usual. Thank you so much, Keaton. Good to see you again. I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my weekend. Thank you very much. It's very nice.